What you're seeing here is me doing damage to a champion in a Legend Lost sector set at 1830 power, with me being roughly 35 power levels under. And this can only really be described as a ridiculous amount of damage. And that's because I'm using the new Final Warning sidearm, the exotic tracking smart pistol from Titanfall, brought to life in Destiny 2 Lightfall. This weapon tracks multiple targets and shoots auto-tracking projectiles from the hip that bend to a ridiculous degree, but if you ADS it, you do double its normal damage to crits. It requires charging up and locking on, and if you fully charge up before you hit something, it'll unravel them while sending these lovely strand nanites out to surrounding enemies. And of course, if you defeat an unraveled target, they unwind into a tangle that allows you to do lots more strand things that keep the destruction going. Simply put, this weapon is a strand main's wet dream. Let's talk about it. Of course, to get to this weapon, you need to unlock all of Strand from the Puka Pond on Neomuna. From there, you get a short but enjoyable quest to get yourself the new hotness. It's a 450 RPM kinetic slot Strand sidearm. That's a lot of words, with a charge time of 1 second. The exotic perk is All at Once, which says, holding down the trigger marks targets within range and loads multiple bullets, which fire in a burst with increased stability on trigger release. Hitting a marked target with a fully charged burst will unravel them. This goes hand in hand with the third column perk called Pick Your Poison, which states, hip-fired projectiles will track marked targets, dealing increased body shot damage on impact. Aimed projectiles have greatly increased velocity and deal extra critical hit damage to marked targets. Basically, get close to something, charge this weapon, wait for the lock-on to complete when it turns red, then let go. If you shoot from the hip, it'll auto-aim for you and do increased body shot damage since it will always default to the target's body. If you ADS with the lock, your bullets will go where you aim, but if you land a crit whilst you're aiming, it'll do double the damage it normally does. The trigger itself is pretty finicky. If you have a lazy trigger finger, like most of us do in Destiny, where you just hold down right trigger or right click, it'll immediately start that 1 second charge time for a shot. There's no delay like Devil's Ruin, where it acts like a normal sidearm by default. The Final Warning assumes that you want that charge shot all the time, which can be less than ideal because sometimes you just want to deal damage right now to the thing you're shooting at. So to do that, you have to tap fire it, like literally just brush your right trigger or tap your mouse. It kind of does the trick, but it feels weird. Perhaps the learning curve requires a little more than the 1.5 days I've had with it, but it's quite awkward. That being said, leaning into the charge is what you want to be doing anyways, because when it works, you're going to be living out that action hero fantasy like nothing else. This gun is tailor-made for PvE and the Strand subclass. It's really very good in enemy-dense content, something you find a lot of on Neomuna. And at this early stage of the season, being underlevel means that everything except SMGs and heavy ammo weapons are going to hit about as hard as freshly made spaghetti. But Final Warning packs a huge punch that can work in just about every situation. Now, you don't have to fully charge it to get the best out of it. It'll still release anywhere from 4 to 8 bullets depending on the charge level. Remember that as long as they're tracked, you're going to get that extra body shot damage on impact. It's just that you're way better off fully charging it, because not only will locking onto multiple enemies cause more chaos, but they'll also become unraveled. Unravel is described as this. The target is permeated with destructive strand matter. As they take additional damage, they create unraveled projectiles that seek out nearby targets. So the more things you hit with a fully charged burst, the more unraveled projectiles help chain damage to surrounding enemies. Think of it like the strand version of Outbreak Perfected's nanites, but they chain and feed off each other, enveloping other enemies and eventually turning one of them into a tangle. And as we're all sort of collectively slowly finding out, tangles are the secret sauce of making strand work even better than it already does. But it's the extra crit damage that really makes this weapon shine whilst we're all underleveled. The lock-on works even in ADS mode. All you need to do is start charging it, aim it at a single target and their crit spot, and watch that health bar evaporate. I'm not quite up to date on my damage numbers for primary weapons, but as far as I can tell, this is head and shoulders above most options in the game. It legitimately feels like a special weapon, bordering on a heavy weapon. The big caveat is, of course, you have to get close. And that's some jeopardy to be putting yourself in, especially when you're dealing with champions who could give a fuck about you and the horse you rode in on. You better stun them first before doing DPS, otherwise your head's gonna come off. It has high DPS capabilities, but let's be real. This is an ad clear weapon. It's a sidearm. I think it's going to be a very strong option in the day 1 raid for its boosted damage, but if there's too much around that can smack you from distance, it's going to be taken off. In content for the mere mortals, however, this is crazy good, and it's crazy good fun, and you'll probably never need nor want to switch off it. In PvP, this is a silly weapon. It's very fun when done right. but here's my experience with it. In the early part of the season, it should come as no surprise to hear that only the diehard sweats are playing. My lobbies are filled with glorious gilded players, and I'm one of those motherfuckers who's got glorious gilded, okay? So I'm one of these people. Skill-based matchmaking is in full effect, so my pool of players right now is really small, and it takes me 5 minutes to load up a quick play game here in the Middle East, and my lobbies are only filled occasionally. I'm talking 4v4, 5v5, 5v6 sometimes. Look, I'm prefacing this section with my first world problems because it's important context for the clips that you're seeing. These are good players I'm up against, and every kill you see here is the result of someone being out of cover, out of position, or generally making a mistake. And these clips are all single kills because you know what? As it turns out, having a weapon that charges with projectiles that aren't hit scan and do only body shot damage is not a super efficient way to kill someone. Yes, the hipfire tracking is ridiculous. Yes, it can go over barricades and around corners like nobody's business. And yes, that 0.26 second TTK or whatever it is with a marked target whilst ADS'd is absolute money when it happens. But you know what's not money? Having to charge up a close range weapon and it not being a near guaranteed way to mess up someone's day, like Devil's Ruin, Cryosthesia, or literally any other fusion rifle in the game. Against good players, they will charge you with shotguns. They will have a sidearm that doesn't need charged, and SMGs that can melt from the hip just fine. They will take your hesitancy whilst you're charging as an open invitation and run with it. Unless you're tap firing this weapon or you're in a lobby where players are very hesitant about their positioning, it's going to be hard to extract consistent performance from this weapon. Now, before I sat down to make this review, I watched Cool Guy's video on this weapon, and he is right about this weapon. There is definitely a skill gap to using it. Understanding that you only need to charge it long enough to mark someone to get its benefits is key. The thing is, your opponent doesn't really care how long you charge it. That half second is all they need to push you, and then you're buggered because you're too busy charging. And by the time you release your shot, not only are they on their way to kill you, but they'll eat that damage in closing the gap and then kill you anyways. Unless you've practiced tap firing this a bunch in PvE, you're going to find it really hard to fight back against literally every other gun in its range class. So the alternative is to play it almost like a bow. Mind your radar, play your corners, look for those opportunities to be a menace. But bow mains would be the first to tell you that intentionally playing close range with anything other than Le Monarch or Trinity Ghoul is a miserable experience, and it takes a very particular kind of person to want to do that. Not to mention the game sense requirements are quite high for this to work. You have to kind of predict where your enemies are going to be, read their play, and then respond in kind, all the while dealing with the charge time that, you know. But when it does work, your jaw will be on the floor, or you'll be doubled over laughing, because even though it's not great most of the time, it's extremely fun some of the time. And that's more than enough to like this for what it is. If I had to rate this like my exotic not tier list, I'd say on its own, it's great. But when considering the meta and the reactive nature of using it, it's just okay. I don't know. Maybe it's too early. Maybe I'm being harsh. Unless someone comes up with a crazy cool way to Spider-Man through maps and hipfire this thing effectively and consistently without having their heads blown off in the process, I can only see this being used by the people who love weird shit in PvP. The performance is definitely there. It's just a bit too out of reach for most people. Ultimately, this is a PvE gun, and that's fine by me. But if there's one thing I could change, it's that I would love to be able to use this thing like a normal sidearm more easily. Even in enemy-dense content, I want that damage now. The charge time can be a real annoyance when I have headless Vex charging me. In PvP, maybe I'd just like to finish someone off that's low without charging. Tap firing is there, it's a thing, absolutely. But it's so unlike any other sidearm right now that it's really awkward to learn to use straight away. I would love for that charge time to be slightly delayed so that when I want it, I actually mean it. Perhaps I'm demonstrating what we call in business a skill issue. But it do be like that right now. Either way, this is a really fun weapon with crazy performance in PvE and a pretty steep learning curve in PvP, but it certainly can be learned, and I'm sure you're a better player than me. So go learn it and go have fun. I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to the patrons who continue to make these videos possible. By the way, patrons, keep an eye out for an update on Patreon over there in the next week. I'm Ascendant Nomad, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.